The remark comes back on its own. An hour after the conversation ended, surfacing at the kitchen sink or in the dark before sleep. With it rises the sentence that would have answered it, sharp and exact and final. The line that was absent when it was needed, and arrives now, flawless, delivered to no one. The person who said the thing is somewhere else entirely, untroubled, perhaps already asleep, the exchange long emptied from their mind. The one who heard it is still inside the scene, rehearsing a reply for a room that cleared out hours ago, as though an answer perfected late enough could reach back and change the way the moment landed. Give the argument its real shape, because it is never abstract when it happens. Picture the meeting where a colleague spoke over the top of you and turned a half-finished point into a joke the table laughed at. Picture the sibling who landed one flat sentence across the dinner and reached for the potatoes before it had even finished landing. Or the partner who said the cold thing on the way out of the room and let the door close on it. Or the stranger at the counter who caught with something small and was gone through the automatic door before the sting had even registered. In each case, the body remembers before the mind does. A small tightening in the chest, a flush that returns with the exact wording. Someone spoke, the moment moved on, and they carried it no further than the hallway. An hour later the scene reopens, and every reason for reopening it sounds responsible. I am only processing what happened, one of them says, sorting a thing that caught me off guard. I want to be ready, says another, in case it comes up again and I have to hold my ground. I am working out what I actually think, now that the pressure of the moment has lifted. And there is a quieter reason none of them says aloud, that to leave the remark unanswered would feel like agreeing with it. Each of these is sincere, and each would be reason enough on its own, if that were truly all that was happening. Underneath the reason sits an interpretation that never quite says its own name, and it is the thing that makes the replay feel necessary rather than optional. The exchange left a score, and the score reads as a loss. Their words landed and nothing of equal weight came back, and until the reply that should have won is finally produced, the loss stands on the board where anyone might see it. The mind does not experience this as a story it is telling itself. It experiences it as a plain fact about the world that simply has to be corrected. Two different activities are tangled together in that hour, and telling them apart changes what comes next. One is remembering, returning to an event to see it accurately, to know what was said and what it meant. The other is refighting, staging the scene again to overturn its verdict, answering the remark and winning the exchange after the fact. The wish to understand what happened is clean and worth keeping. The rule quietly fastened to it, that the loss stands until the perfect answer is delivered, is not memory at all. It is a rematch, dressed in the calm clothes of reflection. And a rematch has a strange requirement that memory never has. To fight the scene again, the mind must first make it hurt again. Memory can live with an unfinished ending. The rematch cannot, and that refusal to let the ending stand is the whole engine of the thing. Watch the sequence build, because it runs the same way almost every time. In the live moment, the remark arrives faster than any reply. The other person had the advantage of choosing when to speak. The one on the receiving end is caught flat, says nothing sharp or fumbles a few words that come out weaker than they were meant to. That is the raw event, and by itself it is small. A remark landed and nothing of equal weight came back. The mind reads that gap almost instantly, and it does not read it neutrally. It reads it as a scoreline. They scored, the other side did not, and files the whole moment under a single heading. I was humiliated, I lost. Once the moment carries that label, it stops being an ordinary awkward exchange and becomes an open wound with a number attached. A loss recorded and waiting to be settled. A mind will not sit quietly beside an open, losing score. so it runs the tape again, searching for the move that would have turned the result, the answer that always seems to arrive too late on the stairs in the car, after every door has already shut. And here, the machinery does its strangest thing. To rehearse the winning answer, the scene has to be staged in full, which means the original sting must be loaded back in first, because there has to be something there to answer. Every rehearsal of the cure then begins by reopening the injury. The replay does not soothe the pain. It reproduces the pain on purpose, since without it there would be nothing left to win. There is a second rigging hidden in the clock. In the real moment, the reply had to arrive in a single breath, while the remark still hung in the air. In the replay, it may be composed at leisure, revised across an hour, tested and polished until it gleams. The mind then sets this unhurried, edited sentence against the clumsy thing that was actually possible in real time, and calls the live self a failure for losing a contest that was never held on equal terms. The body enlists too. Each staging tightens the jaw and quickens the pulse a little, so the mind reads its own arousal as fresh evidence that something genuinely wrong is still happening, and bears down harder on the loop. In imagination, the perfect line always works. The colleague has no comeback. The sibling goes quiet. The partner finally understands. The victory is total, and it is available on demand, which is exactly why the loop is so easy to enter and so hard to leave. Two facts hold it shut. The imagined opponent always falls, because it is not the real person at all, but the puppet the mind is working, so the match is rigged and can be won again and again, without ever meeting the reality that might end it. And every pass wears the groove a little deeper, so the next replay starts more easily than the last, until the scene begins to play itself at the sync, in the cue, in the first quiet minute of the night. The first cost is the evening itself, the real one. The hours that are actually happening while the mind is somewhere else. A night at home passes in a room that no longer exists, replaying a meeting that ended at 5. A film plays on the screen unwatched. A question from the table has to be asked twice. The meal is eaten without being tasted. The people who are physically present. The partner across the table, the child asking to be listened to. Get a distracted shell, someone nodding in the right places, while the better part of their attention is off arguing with a person who is not there. A second charge accrues in the wound itself. Left alone, most slides fade, because memory is merciful and blurs the edges over a few days. Replaying reverses that mercy. Each pass recuts the same line and keeps it fresh, so a remark that lasted 5 seconds becomes an ache that lasts 5 days. And the hand holding the blade is no longer the other person's. They struck once and walked away. The recutting, night after night, is self-administered. A third charge waits in the future. Having rehearsed the attack 100 times, a person walks into the next meeting or the next dinner already braced for it, half expecting a blow that may never come again. The guardedness shows. The voice comes out a little colder, the manner a little sharper than the situation calls for, and the other person, who may have forgotten the whole thing, feels the chill and stiffens in return. Often enough, the conflict rehearsed all night in self-defense turns out to be the very conflict the rehearsal helped to start. A fourth charge is levied on sleep, the one stretch of the day set aside for rest. The loop prefers the quiet hours, when nothing else is loud enough to compete with it, and so the mind goes to work exactly when the body is trying to stop. The argument resumes on the pillow. The perfect line is drafted again in the dark, and the hours that should have repaired the day are spent refighting it instead. Morning arrives already tired, and a tired mind is quicker to take offense, which quietly feeds the next day's supply of things to replay. The quietest cost of all change is the one doing the replaying, more than any of the others. The opponent who is beaten every night in imagination slowly stops resembling the real one. A caricature is easier to defeat, so the mind sharpens the other person into one, crueler, stupider, more plainly in the wrong than the actual human being ever was. The real person, meanwhile, may have softened, apologized, or simply moved on to ordinary friendliness, none of which the caricature is permitted to do, because the loop needs an enemy and keeps one on file. Over days, the relationship quietly migrates from the person to the caricature, and a caricature is a thing one can win against forever, and never once make peace with. Set them side by side. The stolen evening, the self-cut wound, the poisoned next meeting, the ransacked sleep, the person replaced by an effigy, and the private, harmless replay turns out to run a long and itemized bill, which raises an obvious defense. If returning to the scene costs all of this, perhaps the honest cure is simply to never return to it again, and to let the whole thing slide. That defense fails, and it has to be allowed to fail honestly, because some returns to the scene are not a trap at all. Sometimes the replay is genuine review. A person goes back over the exchange and sees that they were the one who was unfair, that the sharp thing was theirs, and that an apology is owed. Sometimes a real conversation is coming tomorrow, a follow-up with the manager, a hard talk with the partner, and the scene truly has to be studied, so the next round can be handled better. Returning in those cases is not a rematch. It is preparation, and refusing it would be its own kind of failure. Sometimes, too, the scene that keeps returning is not a single moment, but a pattern wearing one face. The same colleague has cut across the same person in 4 meetings running. The same relative lands the same jab at every family gathering. Here the mind, returning to the latest instance, may be doing something quite reasonable, noticing a line that repeats, assembling the evidence that this is not an accident, and will not simply stop on its own. To dismiss that as idle brooding would be to ignore a real signal about how a relationship actually works, and about what may have to be said before the next round, and sometimes the humiliation was not merely a private judgment. A manager who demeans someone in front of the whole team has done something with real consequences. To standing, to reputation, possibly to the next promotion. The colleagues who watched will remember it. The room's sense of who is to be taken seriously may have shifted in a single sentence. To tell a person in that position that the injury is only in their head is its own small cruelty, and a false one besides. The wrong was public, it was real, and it may well need answering in a way that changes something out in the world. The sharpest form of the objection cuts deeper still. Does refusing the sting not mean swallowing injustice, training oneself, slide by slide, into a doormat who lets every line be crossed and charges nobody for it? Is the anger not sometimes the correct reading, a signal that the boundary was breached and now has to be defended? These deserve their full weight, not a quick answer. A person who feels nothing at all when wronged is not calm. They are simply absent. What survives all of these cases is a single distinction, and it is finer than think about it or do not. On one side is reviewing in order to act, going back to the scene to draw out one decision. I will raise this with them directly. I will set the boundary. I owe the apology. And then closing the file. On the other side is replaying in order to feel, running the tape for the emotional rematch with no action fastened to its end. Review reaches a decision and stops. Replay has no exit, because the fantasy victory is the whole point of it, and the fantasy victory is always in stock. A plain test sorts the two. Ask what the next hour of replaying is for. If it ends in a sentence that begins with "I will," it was review. if it ends only in a better speech to no one. It was the rematch. Seen this way, the charge of swallowing injustice answers itself, naming that a real wrong occurred, and choosing a response to it is precisely not the replay. The replay does nothing about the wrong. The other person stays entirely untouched by it, while it re-stings the only person it can actually reach. Declining the loop surrenders nothing to injustice, because the loop was never acting on the injustice to begin with. It was only punishing the one who was wronged on the wrong's behalf, long after the wrong itself had left the room, which leaves the real question exposed. Review and rematch can look identical from the inside. The same scene, the same face, the same replayed words, and what separates them at the root is not yet clear, and neither is what a person is to do with the sting, once it has finally been named for what it is. Seneca gave the clearest ancient account of this in his essay on anger, and its central claim is easy to miss because it sounds almost technical. Anger, he argued, is not something that simply happens to a person. The first jolt when the remark lands, the flush in the face, the caught breath, the heat rising before a single thought has formed, is involuntary, and it is not yet anger. Anger proper needs a second step. The mind's assent, its agreement to the judgment, that the wrong was done and that the wrong now demands a reply. And whatever needs our agreement can also be refused it. Lay the replay against that. Between the impression, a person said words I disliked, and the passion, I was humiliated and I must answer, there sits a moment of judgment. That moment is not forced. The mind can assent to I was lured by that, or it can decline to, and everything downstream depends on which it does. The remark does not carry the humiliation inside it, the way a stone carries its weight. The humiliation is added, in that small gap, by a verdict the mind agrees to pass. Here, the category of the thing quietly changes, and this is the turn the whole essay has been moving toward. The humiliation has been treated all along as an event, something that happened once in the past, done and then lodged in the record, now waiting there for redress. Reclassified honestly, it is not a past event at all. The words were spoken once and are already gone. The offense is not sitting in the past being remembered. It is issued new in the present, every single time the scene is replayed, and the verdict I was lowered by that is signed again. The injury is not something the other person did and left behind. It is something being done now, on each loop, by the one still passing the verdict. An echo makes the shape of it plain, and then the picture can be set down. A sound is made once. What returns a moment later is not the speaker still speaking. It is the room handing the sound back. A real echo fades and dies on its own, because nothing is feeding it. This one does not fade, for one reason only. The note is being struck again, deliberately, each time in order to hear it return. The remark was a sound made once and finished. What stings an hour later is not their voice still traveling through the air. It is the mind resounding the note against its own walls. This is why no perfect retort could ever close the wound. A verdict that keeps being renewed cannot be answered away, because there is no sentence final enough. To end a judgment the mind reissues nightly. So the question itself changes. Not what should I have said to win, which is unanswerable, endless and rigged from the start, but a far smaller one, ask in the present. Will I sign the verdict I was humiliated one more time, or withhold it? Seneca's two practical counsels follow directly. Delay, let the impression sit before assenting to it, because the first jolt drains away when it is not fed. And redescription, state the event in plain words. A person said something I disliked and walked away, instead of in the language of scoreboards and defeat. none of this is being told to feel fine. The sting is real, and it is not being denied. What is being shown is only that the offense needs ongoing agreement to survive, and that agreement can be withdrawn, which turns the whole matter from something suffered into something done, and raises the plain question of what, exactly, to do the next time the scene rises at the sink. Understanding the injury differently changes very little on its own, unless it can be carried into the moment the scene actually rises. What carries it there is a small procedure, plain enough for a genuinely bad night, and it has 4 moves. The first is to catch the loop while it is running. Notice that the room is empty, that lines are being delivered to no one, that this is the 3rd time tonight the same scene has started up. The noticing is not a small thing. It is the entire first step out, because the loop runs best unobserved, and simply seeing it as a loop already loosens its grip. The second move is to name it plainly, aloud or nearly aloud. This is a thought about the meeting, not the meeting. I am replaying, not remembering. Naming the scene as a thought rather than an event is Seneca's redescription performed in real time. It lifts the moment out of scoreboard language and sets it down as what it actually is. Mental activity happening now, and not a debt outstanding from the past. Withholding the assent comes third, and it is the hardest to obey. Do not deliver the perfect line one more time. Let the impression stand there without signing the verdict beneath it, and postpone the whole question on purpose. Not now, tomorrow, in daylight. I will look plainly at whether there is any real action here to take. That postponement is Seneca's delay, and it works on a simple fact. The jolt, denied its rehearsal, quietly loses its charge. The 4th move returns attention to one real thing in front of the body, the dish in the hand, the road through the windscreen, the actual person still waiting to be heard across the table. Attention is the single fuel the loop runs on, and it is the one thing that can genuinely be moved. Starve the loop of it and the loop goes quiet. Not because the note was finally answered, but because the hand stops striking it, and the room stops ringing the moment no one sounds the note again. A quieter discovery tends to follow after a few honest returns. The perfect retort simply stops mattering. Not because it was found at last, but because the match that needed it is no longer being played. The limits are real and worth saying without softening. Naming the loop will not make the sting vanish on command. Some replays return several times before they loosen, and the practice is repeated, declining. Not a single switch thrown once and for good. On a genuinely bad night, the 4 moves may have to be run 5 or 6 times in an hour, each pass a little less convincing than the one before. And that repetition is not a sign of failure. It is exactly what the practice is. It cannot undo what was actually said, and it cannot hand the exchange back to be run again. Where a real wrong genuinely needs answering, as in the cases conceded earlier, the practice does not settle it. It hands it to a plain decision made in daylight, and the wrong still has to be faced there. It will not stop the thought from arising at all. It stops only the reapproval once the thought has come. And it guarantees just one thing, the single thing the replay could never offer, that the person is no longer the instrument re-inflicting the injury on themselves. The remark comes back again on another ordinary night, at the same sink, in the same tired hour. The perfect sentence rises with it, as sharp and final as ever. The conditions have not changed at all. What has changed is the question that meets them. No longer what should I have said to win. That search was always unanswerable, endless, and rigged in advance. The question now is smaller, and it can actually be answered. Am I going to sign this verdict one more time, or name it as a thought and set it down? The other person's words ended an hour ago or a week ago, and were gone almost as soon as they were spoken. The humiliation that kept coming back was never there left over. It was renewed each time by the one who kept replaying it, and it needed that renewal to exist at all. The argument that felt so unfinished was finished the moment they walked away. Only the verdict stayed open, and it stayed open because it kept being reopened by hand. A conversation that has already ended cannot be won. It can only be restaged or set down, and setting it down is not defeat. It is the refusal to keep the loss alive one more night. Name the line you keep rehearsing to a room that emptied hours ago, and the one task in front of you tonight you could turn your attention to instead. These essays follow a single thought all the way through, one at a time. Subscribe if that is worth an evening, and stay a while.